We'll share my screen in a bit, but good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us at the Rare Rounds. We are excited for our upcoming discussion on improving clinical transparency and data sharing. Before we get everything kicked off, I wanted to review a few brief housekeeping rules with all of you. First, all attendees are currently muted by the moderator, so myself, to reduce any interruptions. We encourage you to use the chat function in Zoom window for any questions you have. We're also encouraging in this session to kind of get people involved, and we really want to hear from you and have you answer questions. So if you hit the participant button, you should see some symbols at the bottom there. And if you do have a question or a comment, click on the hand raise and I will call on you and then we'll have you add to the conversation. So there's not a ton of us, so I think we would really like to have people contribute what they can and when they can. So feel free to use that function and then I can call on you and we'll add. So we'll see how that works, and if it doesn't work, we'll change things up, but we'll start with that. If you have any questions on where to find that, feel free to type it in the chat and I can help with that. But to open the chat, you have to click on the chat button that's located on the meetings control at the bottom of your screen near the mute icon. If there are questions that we are not able to address during the time that we are together, that the speakers aren't able to address, we'll do our best to follow up after the program with answers to those questions. Admitting a few more people. All right, so in the interest of making us all feel more connected in the discussion, I would like to ask everyone to turn on their videos as you feel comfortable. If you have technical difficulties or questions about the program as a whole, please remember to visit our help desk, which is located in the main lobby, where you can chat with the tech team and the Global Genes team members. So I'm gonna share my screen with you all. Maybe. Awesome. And pull that up. Great. Can you all see that okay? Yes, yep. Seeing nods. Okay, great.
Yes. Hey, Rachel, you're in like preview mode. You want to put the whole screen?
Yes. Is that in display settings? I think, let's see.
If you go down and click your whole screen there at the bottom.
Am I missing it?
Yep, over till you see the computer screen.
Okay, there we go. Awesome.
Yeah. Nope, that wasn't it.
Let's see. I know I saw Susan had this earlier. Let's see. What did she hit? Oh, did that work?
Yes.
Awesome. Yay. We're all learning. So, all right. So finally, we encourage you all to participate as active listeners and take advantage of the opportunity to hear from leaders and experts and hear and ask questions of them. This program is your time to learn and find answers on critical challenges in the rare disease space. I am now pleased to welcome our discussion leaders, TJ Sharpe from Starfish Harbor and Jenn McNary from J. McNary Consulting. They will share a more complete background as we delve into the conversation, but for now, I'd like to invite TJ Sharpe to kick things off.
Thank you, Rachel. There's me. Hello, everybody. And maybe I'm in the corner as well. Live from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I am not on the beach, I promise, but it does look nice here. My background is probably not what everyone would consider rare disease as a cancer patient, although I guess melanoma is in the realm of rare disease, but I don't consider being a cancer patient and advocate as a rare disease. But I've learned a lot about rare diseases from a number of other advocates, including my co-host here today, Jen, who will be introducing herself in a second. My melanoma journey began when I was 25. It was a stage 1 melanoma. It became stage 4 when I was 37 and had 2 small kids, and was given basically a chemotherapy suggestion for treatment, and said, good luck. I'll be surprised if you're here in 2 years. All of that has turned out to have a very positive ending. I've been a part of 2 clinical trials, 4 different immunotherapies, and 6 surgeries. And I am here now, which is a blessing for sure. But my mission and purpose has been really to help the next patient, not just the next melanoma patient, not even just the next cancer patient, but all the patients that are going to come. And, as you hear, that all of us will be patients or caregivers one day, that I have an opportunity to be able to speak to not just my own journey, but represent the voice of the patient in clinical research with a number of different companies. Jen and I are on the advisory board or the Patient Advocacy Council for one vendor company, Medable, but I sit on 4 or 5 other different advisory councils or boards or whatever they may be called, and bring a consistent patient voice into drug development, into clinical research, into really anything that affects the patient, but focused on those 2 areas. So it is my pleasure to be here. I have been working with Jen for about a year, and a couple of our other colleagues are also on the line. So I'm glad that Richie and Joni could join. And I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to turn it over to Jenn McNary, who is, as you see, a superstar in the caregiver and rare disease world. So Jen, why don't you take it away?
Hi, everybody. And I'm really excited that I recognize a vast majority of the people in this group. So I'm really excited to be helping to moderate this session. Moderate being the key word. We're hoping to have a really robust discussion. There's a lot of experts in this room. And this is the kind of room we're going to be in for a while. As many of you know, I won't stay on, my rare disease journey, but I'm the mother of three sons with rare diseases. I have 2 sons who are now adults with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and I have a 3rd son who was diagnosed just 2 years ago with primary immune deficiency, and he's 12. And then I have a little daughter who's 9.5. And so I'm definitely a rare mom and rare caregiver, but I also started using that skill set to make a career out of it. And so I became a consultant about 4 years ago, working to help companies better their engagement with patients to make their work more patient-centric. We had the benefit of being part of a clinical trial that my sons were able to participate in, and I was able to help the company develop patient-reported outcomes retrospectively during that clinical trial in order to present to the FDA and to get that drug looked at, and ultimately it was approved. And so I use that skill set to really involve patients and caregivers whenever possible. We're talking today about data sharing in rare research and really transparency in data. And I wanted to just start this discussion off by letting you know some things that are important to me. And I know that we're going to have some questions up on the screen later that we're hoping you all will answer. So use the raise your hand function, be unmuted, have a discussion, tell us where you sit on these different topics. We're not just content experts, we're really just here to facilitate this discussion. Some of the things that are important to me or have become important to me over the last 8 years of being part of clinical research and part of clinical trials, whether they're natural history or interventional, is that the patients are involved in data outcome measures from the very beginning. If you don't involve patients when you're collecting outcome measures, you run the risk of collecting the wrong thing that doesn't mean anything, or potentially, not creating a therapy that anybody is even interested in. And so involving patients to really develop those outcome measures is really important to me. And I want to hear about how you all are involved in being part of that process. It's become important to me that patients who are in clinical trials, sometimes that's the only care that they're getting. And so it's really important to provide that data back to their clinicians and to themselves. And so looking at ways that we can be creative and enhance the experience and remove the burden. We're all being, as caregivers and patients, we're being asked to participate in numerous registries, natural history studies. There are so many platforms that are being creative that are asking for our data. And so I have some, best practices that I'd like to see, but I'd also like to hear, what are those best practices to you? Some of the things that I want to make sure is that patients are compensated fairly. Somebody's profiting, somebody ought to be compensating patients. and also that they own their data and that they, you know, can choose to share it with other folks if they want to. And they choose how that's shared and when and how much of it. And then finally, you know, I think that, you know, it's incredibly important to move the needle in research, whether a clinical trial fails or succeeds, because patients who are in a study for 3, 4, 5 years deserve to have a way that that data helps elevate their patient community. And so I'm looking to find out, how are people seeing companies share data after a failed study? I have examples of companies that I've worked with in order to give back that data to communities, or to give it to other companies that are going to continue to develop drugs and therapies for those communities. And really, it's just all about being patient-centric, and transparency is the most important thing in my mind when you're being patient-centric. And so I want to leave it there and pull up these questions and really open the discussion about how you're doing it if you're a patient advocate. And please introduce yourself with what your role is when you start speaking, because I want to stay connected and know who's doing what. We're all doing great work. So if you're a patient advocate, if you work for a pharmaceutical company, how are you making sure that your data collection is serving the patients ultimately and mutually beneficial?
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. I'll start facilitating from here. I think we want to go right on. Ow, sorry, guys.
Where'd you
Right
go,
into
TJ?
That's the danger of wearing a headset and knocking the cord out of your hand. Let's get right into Jen and I have 5 different topics we felt very comfortable and very curious to talk on. I've seen at least one person put something in the chat room already. We're just going to leave these up here, so it's going to be a little bit of a balancing act or a juggling act for us to get to everyone. We want you guys to participate. Rachel's going to help us navigate that, but we'll probably start going down the list. I would encourage you to put questions in the chat, even if you are going to ask them later, because I believe we will get the chat transcript, or at least I hope we will, and we'll be able to look at that as part of some of the follow-up that we can do for this. So without further ado, the very first question we wanted to talk about in transparency and data sharing are some of the key misunderstandings and common missteps that both advocacy groups and researchers encounter. This is one that I'm teeing up for Jen because she's got quite a bit of background on this. But I think maybe, Jen, do you want to give a quick thought on that, and then we'll see if we have any audience participation?
Sure, and as TJ said, you know, having been in this space for 19 years, I've seen the evolution of advocacy groups and pharmaceutical companies, and I just want to start with the number one misstep in data sharing is trying to be really restrictive and own everything yourself. If you can't collaborate, if you don't collaborate, we end up with things like multiple registries for the same disease, and we don't know how many patients we actually have. We end up with companies that fail and leave, taking their entire natural history with them. And so that's sort of the biggest thing we've seen in the Duchenne community. It's the biggest thing that I've seen going forward, but I'm definitely curious to see what are some of the don'ts that you've seen, and how would you suggest we fix them going forward?
Awesome. I'm going to hit participants so I can see if anyone has their hand raised, but does anyone like
can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted I was going to say that exact same thing. I'm Blair Van Brunt, and I have a daughter with Shwachman-Diamond syndrome who has just been given her clear for her bone marrow transplant that she's been recuperating in her house for a year. And I've been working with a company called Trend Community who were about collecting patient data. And I wanted to endorse what you're saying, Jen, is that there's a balance for what data you want to strictly keep and own, and then how how to collaborate to share it. Because honestly, when you're just as a patient group, I ran our patient group for many, many, many years, and it's, you know, if you just hoard it all, it's not helping your patients at all. And so you've got to figure out that way, and your word is the right one, in my opinion, is to collaborate with those that can help you best use that data to help the patients, to help the research, and figure out steps forward. Because I do think, you know, it can really harm the patient groups to just be so strict with their data ownership. And I agree that, you know, perhaps, you know, compensation does come into play here, but there's got to be a lot of conversation instead of just the we own, you do not, goodbye.
Yeah, it's definitely the trend of not having a group own everybody's data, but essentially having the decision making lie with the patient who is providing that data. I recently worked with a patient population that didn't know that their nonprofit essentially owned all the data they had provided, and they really wanted to push the needle forward and provide that to companies, and they didn't realize they had signed their rights away. And so I'm a huge proponent of exactly that.
Yeah, I know. It just means communicate. Everybody has got to communicate.
Yes, that's patient centricity.
Yeah.
And this is TJ. I see it from a different side in the oncology world, where we are blessed that we have so many treatments that are in development. The problem in this space is that we don't share data quickly enough to build upon findings, or to do things like fail fast. It's a nice little buzzword, but if it takes us years to get trials run, particularly in the rare disease space where you guys are very familiar, and you're not sharing data, and you're not understanding what's working and what's not working, it's much harder to pivot. It's kind of like the cruise ship that's on my little background right there. It's a lot harder to change that direction once you get going. So one of the things that I've noticed, and we'll get to question 2 in a few minutes, is that there are now technologies and initiatives in the patient world and in the clinical research world that are looking to take that ownership of data, not out of the hands of big pharma or the data owners, but to have it co-owned by the patients that need it, so that they can do things like patient registries and natural history, and be able to contribute to a bigger body of knowledge.
Awesome. Thank you all for that. I'm gonna chime in because I see a hand raised. So Sue, if you'd like to share your comment.
Sure. I'm Sue Khan. I'm Executive Director for NTSAD, National Tay-Sachs and Allied Diseases. And I just have 2 things. I don't know if they're misunderstandings. They're just challenges and things particularly I think about in retrospect. So we worked with one company who came to our annual family conference every year for 5 years, and worked between them and some physicians on our scientific advisory committee. We conducted a series of these assessments that helped contribute to natural history over these 5 years. So now the company is they've committed to publishing creating a publication, which will be obviously at a summary level rather than us having all the access to the data. But knowing what I know now, I don't know if it would have been possible for us to get access to the anonymized data and make that commitment, so that as we work with other groups doing studies, that we could kind of bring all this data together. So it's kind of a reflection. And so that one thing is, I wonder if that's even possible. And the second challenge is that other patient groups that we kind of work in a similar space have started a registry, maybe a simple registry, but kind of are out there advertising. And in reality, it would be good if we had one registry for the whole community, the whole disease community. And yet even patient groups kind of see this as kind of, maybe their competitive edge, maybe that was mentioned. And so it's just a tricky thing is that's what people always ask me, why don't you start a registry? Well, we're not the only ones that speak for our community in our diseases of Tay-Sachs, Sandhoff, Canavan, and GM1. So these are just challenges that I've observed both from a patient advocacy perspective and then kind of partnering with companies. And if anybody has any experience or insights who's run into those challenges, that would be interesting to hear about.
No, I agree. I was going to put that out there and say, you know, has anybody solved the conundrum of multiple registries? Has anybody got a good story, or is that something that we make note of later and send it over to Global Genes to work on for the summit?
I've avoided one just by communicating when I was running the disease, the foundation of my daughter's disease. There were 2 different people wanting to start completely in separate registries, but I luckily didn't have to then deal with it was created and had to figure out how to merge it. It's a tricky one, so.
It is. We'll add it to our list of conundrums to solve.
Along with all the splintering.
Awesome.
Hi,
Well, we have, sorry, go ahead.
My name is Leah Myers. I'm the executive director for the Families SCN2A Foundation. We do have the same thing. It's funny how rare diseases can splinter like that, but you know, I don't think anyone's immune to it. And so we have different data collections in different areas, and none of them are talking to each other. So you know, we've really been trying to work on, and Heidi that's on this call also, unique identifiers, so we can merge the data even if it's de-identified in some way, so people don't have to keep answering the same questions. So you know, there's different ones. There's GOIDs, there's CRIDs, clinical research identifier, unique identifiers. So that's, you know, something that we're looking into right now as a solution, a possible solution.
Any other thoughts that anyone wants to share before we transition to the next topic? Don't be shy.
TJ, I'm going to jump in here because we did get a question. So someone was wondering ideas on how to harmonize existing data sets. So I'm not sure if you want to elaborate on that. They commented, and I don't know if the person who asked this question wants to kind of hop in, but said that they have a few collaborators, excuse me, that have their own existing sets and want to figure out the best way to work with them and encourage sharing.
I will quickly touch on it, and then if anybody else would like to, that would be great. One of the organizations I work with as a patient representative is called Transcelerate. It's a 501c3 that's sponsored by a number of different pharma companies, and their goal is to improve clinical research in non-competitive areas and make the entire experience better, faster, safer for everyone, for all stakeholders. One of the initiatives that has spun off of that is an initiative called Data Accelerate. And I wish I could speak better to it. It's not part of what I've worked on, but that they've talked quite a bit in Transcelerate about that initiative in harmonizing data sets so that there is a much better or much more, much greater base of knowledge that all the member companies and then eventually all clinical researchers can utilize. So we are getting insights faster and more accurate, and without having to go through the time and effort and human capital of doing another trial or waiting another 5 years to get natural history. Anybody else? Any thoughts on there?
So my name is Heidi Gravenstetter. I'm the science director for the International Foundation for CDKL5 Research. And as Leah alluded to, we have multiple registries. We have a patient generated data through interviews and quality of life, seated at a Australian collection center at an institute. And then we have clinical collected data across our 8 centers. And we have a registry at the Orphan Disease Center that's getting ready to launch. And as we talked about, it's sort of, what do you need to do before you can merge all of those things? And so we're looking at those common identifiers, and different registries have different long-term interests as far as, are they willing to work with NIMH and get the access to the global identifier? All they have to do is get a tool and write that GUID to work with each other, or do they want a local identifier that then works with their proprietary platform? Because maybe they have different interests for their data. And so that's where you get into competitive and what are all the parties' interests, and outlining those from the start the best you can. And when you have a public institutes that you're working with, and then proprietary companies, that's where it becomes more of a challenge. The code and de-identifying the data is not necessarily that hard, from what I understand. It's what your partners are willing to do. So that's where we have partnerships and everyone's willing to work together. It's what solution everyone's willing to settle on. Given, are we selling, are our long-term plans to sell data of pharma, and are we willing to say that out loud or not?
Yeah, I think it's important. It's important that you note what everybody's motives and plans are before you get together. I do have an example. There were 2 organizations that realized that they had very similar patient populations in their registry, and so they were able to. They didn't combine registries, but what they did do is sent out a combined survey to see where they were duplicated, because a lot of folks were registered in both, and with an ultra rare disease, you don't always know, how many patients you actually have. If you have 4 registries and 30 patients in each, are they the same 30 patients, or do you have different patients? And it doesn't benefit anybody to duplicate. And I think I skipped to number 3, unfortunately, sorry. I'll leave it to TJ to perhaps move on so that we can facilitate the next couple questions in order here.
Not a problem. I think we'll leave everybody in bated breath till number 3. And we kind of touched on number 2 already. I mentioned Transcelerate. It's one of the places where I'm heavily involved. They have a couple different initiatives that are in a little bit of a different vein in transparency and data sharing. One of their initiatives is working with presenting a clinicaltrials.gov registry of the future concept, so that there is an improved clinical registry site that can be used to search and retrieve information about different trials. There's also a data, not so much a data transparency and sharing behind it, but there's an initiative to clean up the trial data that goes in. I think most of the data talk that we've had so far is about what we do with patient data and how that's accessed. But there certainly is another thought about transparency and sharing in the type of data that we're trying to gather, and how to find a treatment or a trial based on that. And there's a number of other initiatives that they have there. But what I wanted to touch on here is that there is a significant amount of movement in the clinical research field, and in what we call the DIA field, the Drug Information Association, and their associated businesses that would be going there in person next week if we actually had a conference. And the technologies are there, and the advances in sharing technologies. Everyone hears blockchain. That certainly is being explored quite a bit. Artificial intelligence in taking data inputs and using them to then be able to make sense of either a doctor's notes or what's put into a clinical trial registry like clinicaltrials.gov. The technologies are there. And it seems like up until about, I don't know, 3 months ago, there wasn't much of an urgency to share. And now that the whole world has turned upside down and virtual everything is popping up, those tools have gotten a lot more press, for lack of a better word, that pharmaceutical companies are starting to talk more about those technologies and using them to be able to communicate with patients that they already have, to be able to accrue patients in trials or get patient data in non-standard ways. So those are some of the advances that I've seen, and how that there are a number of in the non-competitive spaces that Heidi mentioned in the Q&A, where we as patients are starting to see some movement more than just a shiny new toy thing. That there are pilots being done kind of because they have to right now, to look for more information where you couldn't just get it typically before. And I'll open that door up to anyone who would like to jump in there. If you've seen any other tool or technique that has been used to share data, or if you don't see it and are still waiting for something that is sorely needed by the community. Anyone? Don't all shout at once. Rachel, is anybody raising their hand?
I don't see any hand raises. I was just going to make a comment. If you have something, feel free to raise your hand. I can unmute you. Otherwise, if we don't have a comment, we do have another question, but definitely want to open it up to comments before we get to that.
I guess my question about the non-competitive space was more related to, as patient advocacy groups, we, in the clinical outcome measures that we're developing, we see there's a push for patient advocacy groups to develop these outcome measures, and there have been some that own the outcome measures. So as these new tools are developed, and there's a user-friendly ability for patient groups to get their hands on them, there has to be a, I guess, understanding, especially as you enter into collaborations, of what your goals are. Because if the goal is to help the greater community and not for financial gain, or to eventually develop a company which will propel future therapies potentially, what's happening in endpoint enabling trials is groups are trying to quickly modify outcome measures that are owned by other patient groups to get a quick approval for FDA, right? Someone earlier talked about that's not necessarily the best outcome measure for your disorder, and you may have to have a short-term and a long-term objective. You might have to have the short-term goals with the FDA to modify ones that have already been developed, say in the neurodevelopmental disorder space, but then you have to have long-term clinical trial, clinical research goals where you're looking at scalability in disorders like yours, and you're working with the patients to have patient-centric clinical outcome measures that match and capture your disorder. I don't know if I'm making any sense.
You are making a lot of sense. And I had a couple of thoughts while you were speaking. You know, I came from being a patient advocate just for my sons, right? And then I worked in advocacy for an organization for a number of years. And I still moved over to working as a consultant in pharma. And I will say that the reason that I did that is that the motives are always very clear. I always understand what they're trying to do. I always understand what they need. And so then it makes it very, very clear how to move forward. I think that what we as advocates need to do is to really encourage our advocacy organizations to play the long game, to really look at, we need multiple therapies, right? And so if we create outcome measures and we validate them as an advocacy organization, and then we only share that information with the one company that we like, that we want to work with, that does not benefit the patient population at all, because there's always going to be better treatments. You know, my boys have been on an exon skipping therapy, and now gene therapy is coming. What if we only focused on working with a company that was working on exon skipping, and we never wanted to create a bigger move? Parent Project MD is a great example. They work with everybody. And so, you know, in the Duchenne space. And so I think that we as advocates need to do better when talking to advocacy organizations and remind them who they serve. And the short answer to that is that they serve the patients. They don't serve, they're not self-serving. Certainly they have to run a business and they have to stay afloat, but that it's most important to think about the long game and to think about how they can benefit all of their patients to come, all of the therapies. Competitive space is amazingly good for us. There should never be a worry that we're going to help this one drug company because they give us the most money every month, or we're going to help this one drug company because we're invested in them, or we're going to, you know, it really should just be about developing outcome measures that move with the group. And so I don't have an answer to that question, but I can tell you that I thought it was just Duchenne. And then when I started working in pharma with companies that don't work in Duchenne, I realized it's everybody. And so we just need to, Global Genes, NORD, EveryLife, the overarching foundations that guide our smaller foundations need to really talk about developing data that serves everybody.
Across disorders, and the short term and the long term, and how it's complementary, not competitive.
Correct.
And working with the regulators, because
So
right now
if you look at the FDA, you know, one of the things that Janet Woodcock has been saying to me for years is look at cystic fibrosis and start doing platform studies. You know, in every conversation I've had with her, start doing platform studies. And you know what you have to do if you're going to do platform studies? You have to collaborate across pharmaceutical companies and patient advocacy organizations, because you're adding therapies and you're stacking them on top of each other. So everybody has to agree on the outcome measures, and everybody has to agree on, you know, who the patients are and what populations you're accepting. And then everybody has to share, right? And so if you look at regulators, they're telling us to do this.
That's helpful. Thank you.
I hope so.
And there are some advocacy groups that do encourage that. Maybe not across advocacy groups in the cancer space. A few of them do. The Melanoma Research Alliance and the Prostate Cancer Foundation both have that mantra of sharing data. But it has to start growing across more than just one organization or a couple of the well-funded ones, so that that data that becomes part of natural history of other diseases is collected as well, which I think, Heidi, you are good at transitioning us from one talking point to another. I think this is a perfect segue into talking about not burdening patients with collecting things like redundant data or having to switch data from one register to another. This again is more Jen's area than mine, so I'm going to lean on her a little bit, but also want to get a few other people involved here, because this is a big area in rare disease that you guys have a lot of collective knowledge about.
We do have at least one or two folks from pharma here. It would be great to hear thoughts, not to put anybody in the spot, so I won't call your names out, but it would be great to hear thoughts about what conversations are happening within pharma to be sure that you're not burdening patient populations.
I'm going to jump in real quick. Sorry. We'll have this discussion, but I want to just make everyone aware that there's a 15-minute warning before the session ends. And I have a couple housekeeping, so we'll end 5 minutes early. Then I do have a question. So after this discussion, if I could get that question in, that'd be great. But definitely would love to hear more people what they have to say about that. So.
Rachel did not get you pharma people off the hook.
I only see a couple, and you know, I never want to put anybody on the spot, and I think it's fine. Gosh, we only have 15 minutes left. That's crazy. I think it's fine to move on to, you know, and just continue and think about that, and think about that with your pharma partners and your advocacy partners. How are you ensuring that you're not burdening patients? I know that I'm asked multiple times a day to answer surveys or provide feedback, or, you know, register in this platform or this app or that app. And we just need to be mindful of patients' time, especially when they're caring for either caregivers or they're caring for themselves. But TJ, take us to question 4. I want to hear about best practices.
We are going to hear, hopefully from pharma again here, hear from them for the first time maybe, about the practices of companies or platforms that do put the data reporting onus in the hands of patients or caregivers. I know my experience with that is somewhat limited, but working with a company with Jen that allows virtual trials and has given a platform for a number of different diseases to get insights into very minutia of data collection. The practice of being able to gather data outside of the clinical setting that has meaning to patients and significant meaning in outcomes is now beginning to really be the barometer for a good trial design. So does anyone here have a good example of a practice for either a company or a platform that pulls that in well?
Hey, this is Allie Freitas. I work for PTC Therapeutics.
There you are.
Patient advocacy. Hey, Jen. I saw you calling us out. We at PTC, we have a pretty broad pipeline, including some commercial drugs in Duchenne and other diseases around the world. Something that we're doing now as we advance our pipeline is just, like you said, recognizing the burden of illness across the families. And as far as testing goes, we have some new testing programs for some upcoming gene therapies and offering saliva testing over blood. So patients, you know, it's just one less test, one less draw that's less invasive. So we're trying our best to really keep those invasive tests to a minimum.
Hi, this is Vivian Fernandez. I work for Regenix Bio, also in gene therapy. I just want to make a general comment that we do hear you. It is as frustrating for us within on the sponsor side of things to be, you know, recreating the wheel. The reality is, you know, we don't have access to other available data. So I think this is a really important issue. I think the patient voice is super strong here. Let's hope the climate is changing. Anytime we have to go back out and add observational data because we need natural history data, it slows us down and it's super frustrating to us. And at least from my perspective, and we don't have anything on the market, we're early clinical development, but we work really closely with the patient organizations. So if there's anyone within the company, it could be our market access group, or it could be another function within the company wanting to reach out and survey families. We always work through the patient organizations because we know everyone's tapping in to the same families and patients. But we hear you and we feel your pain.
Thank you both for speaking up. Much appreciated.
Yes, you're welcome. We're trying.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? Is there a concern that you're only reaching a limited slice of the audience. I know in rare disease, you probably have more exposure to the entire population, but is there a concern that you're not getting a full representation of the disease population?
Is that directed to me?
Yes.
Yes, I mean, I think that's always a concern, right? You want to make sure that you get the broad spectrum. So yes, we do worry about that.
Is there anything you could tell us that you would suggest to make sure you're getting that broad view? I don't want to put you on the spot, so if you don't have an answer,
Test
it's
the net,
okay.
I guess. Give yourself plenty of time. If you only give, I mean, this is sort of an obvious answer, but you know, if people are racing and say, we can only put this up for 2 weeks, and so you always probably get the same families, but you know, give yourself time so that more people can participate.
And I do have a hand raised. Thank you for that, Vivian. Richie, if you'd like to make your comment. Unmute you there.
Thanks, Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple thoughts, and I come at this from the CRO side. So I have these conversations frequently with sponsors and biotech companies. One of the things that we're seeing more and more of with COVID, I think really leading the way, is this desire to have electronic patient-reported outcomes and electronic clinical outcomes assessments. And I really love that that empowers patients to collect and provide data where they are, when they want to do it. But one of the things that comes up often with a lot of the clients I chat with, you know, they get really excited about wearables and bring your own device. And when you look at the data, you know, for who owns a Fitbit or an iPhone, I know they're coming down in price and they're becoming more and more available, and more people have them. But my word of caution is always, you know, if you're not providing the device or considering providing device for some patients, you are narrowing the potential patient pool. If you don't have the device, you can't afford the device, that rules you out of the study. So it's something that I think the industry really has to be mindful of moving forward.
That's a great point, Richie, and that it excludes often the patients that are already fairly underrepresented in clinical research as it is. So
Exactly.
We're compounding a problem and just catering to the part of research that already is more heavily involved. So thanks for chiming in there.
Sure.
Anybody else on this? We only have a few minutes left. And we can very quickly touch on point 5, or we can stay on point 4. That's fine. If you have something, please weigh in. Phone lines are open.
I was thinking we just open it up for any last thoughts. I know we were asked to end at 3:25 so that Rachel can give some final instructions, but certainly we should keep this conversation going. It's an important one. Are there any sort of last comments or last thoughts that anybody had?
This is Allie again from PTC. I just want to thank you guys again for hosting us and having this conversation. And just coming from industry and a patient advocacy perspective, please come to us, reach out to the companies that are working in your space. I know for us at PTC, my cell phone is posted everywhere. You can call, you can text me, you can Facebook me, you can LinkedIn me. We want to hear from you, right? If something's not working, if you're hearing a rumor, something in the field, that's what we're there for. And we take it very serious and we bring it back to the company. And I just want to confirm, we're not sales, we're not marketing. So your information is always safe with us and it's safeguarded. So we love this dialogue and we're so grateful for it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allie.
Anyone else in the 3 minutes we have left before we'll turn it back over to Rachel? 2 minutes we have left.
I would say to continue to raise the issue. This spans across all therapeutic areas. You know, I personally would love to see a lot of this sit with the patient community. The resources are a challenge as well, not just, you know, what it would cost to manage the data, but also to, you know, people-wise, right? So the conversation needs to continue.
Thank you. Agree with that wholeheartedly. I think we're pretty much, I know there's a couple more minutes left. We want to give you guys time to get to the next session. Jen, any closing thoughts as a superstar panelist here?
Oh, just thank you everybody for adding to the conversation. And I think that it's important to just note that patients have more control than they ever had over their own data, over what's collected, over how it's used. I've followed it from natural history studies that my sons were in, through a clinical trial, through new biomarkers and new endpoint studies, and through to an approval, including patient-reported outcomes. And so the power really does lie with the moms and dads and caregivers that are living, and patients that are living with these diseases, and we really can contribute. And so I'd like to see anybody that thinks that they have something to add to the conversation, just do so.
And I will echo that on my way out the door here, thanking Jen for all of the information she's shared, not just today, but knowing her for a year or so now, and seeing disease in a different way. The more that we all learn as advocates, the better we serve each other. And I don't think that TJ as a cancer advocate can speak as well as Jen as a rare disease caretaker. But together we're a pretty good team. She's the David Letterman, I'm the Paul Schaefer. We work okay together. So I want to thank all of you for coming. If I had thought of it, I would have put our contact information there. But you can get in touch with either one of us if you have any questions, or at least with me. For me, I'm happy to share. I will put in the chat my contact information, and happy to talk more about any of the initiatives that Transcelerate is doing, or what's in some of the other types of disease advocacy that I'm involved in, because it's much more effective for all of us to work as a human team, and I think we work very well that way. So I appreciate Jen having me on board here, and Rachel and Global Genes having us as part of this. And I'll turn it over to Rachel for a closeout.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. I'm going to stop the share. Oh, good. I was afraid I was going to kick everyone out. Well, great. Thank you so much, TJ and Jen, for everything and the comment and the great discussion. And thank you all for the questions and response. It's really great. You know, we're all navigating this new online system, and I think that was really awesome. It's so great to see faces and people, and to have a great discussion. So next up, from 2:30 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Eastern, please select the next session from the agenda in the auditorium. If you have any questions, there's that help desk in the main lobby. If there's tech questions or questions that you have just for us, we have a Global Gene staff on the help desk as well. But besides that, that is all I have for you. Thank you all so much again. Have a great rest of your day, and enjoy the rest of the sessions.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Jen and TJ.
Sorry, I'm trying to get this.
No, you're all good.
Jen put her email in here, and I'm trying to get it copied.
I know, I just noticed that. I should have said it before people were heading out. But yes, definitely make sure you get that. I'll wait to end it. So
It's always that awkward moment where someone's screwed around.
no,
Thank
not
you very
at all.
much. Take care.
Yeah, thank you for everything. Bye.